Um, and so, you know, as I said, because of this mixed bag of the strong, you know, we've got this growing body of really strong science for the species, but also a much better understanding of how people's beliefs of the species really is going to have an important impact on the outcome of any conservation actions that we undertake. And it's only through collaboration, you know, between all of these different facets, I think that is going to help us get to the finish line, which is hopefully the downlisting of the species. And it's you know, this, and I'm sure there's logos that I have forgotten on here, but there's just this growing number of organizations, people, researchers, just interested in the species, worried about their future, and really willing to get stuck in and help in any way possible to make sure that we can try and carve out a niche for the species. And so, you know, collectively, we are the Thunderbird Task Team, which is a working group or an action group, but collectively trying to implement conservation actions, share information, understand and learn from each other's experiences, so that we together grow this greater knowledge within our group, and also enable us to share that not only within South Africa, but also then across into our neighboring countries, because, you know, we really have a huge head start on our neighbors in terms of developing research protocols and conservation protocols. And so I think it is this incredible group together that has made this possible. So, you know, we've got our 2 ground hornbills. Ours now has research since 1966. So, you know, there's been a lot going on for a number of decades. And yet, though, ground hornbill are certainly sliding towards critically endangered. And the further down that slope we go, the higher that might be sustainable into the long run. The good news is, though, although the northern ground hornbill is the least studied big bird probably on the continent, there is not a single paper published on even the most basic biology of the species. We are now able to take a lot of what we've learned from the southerns, and sort of copy and paste that onto the northerns. And so we're heading up to Ghana in December to start the first fieldwork for the northern ground hornbill. And once we have an idea of how similar and how different these two are from each other, we'll able to know what of our conservation tools can be used to support the other ground hornbill too. So I think, you know, from South Africa, not only are we able to support the rest of the range states for the southern, but I'm hoping we're also going to be able to support all of the range states that need to do something for the northern ground hornbill too. And so for me personally, it's been a long road. The picture on the left is from when my parents did the early research in Kruger National Park. And so for me, every school holiday was spent in Kruger, standing on the roof of cars, peering into ground hornbill nests. But when they started their research, it was simply an academically interesting bird. Here's a cool bird, cooperative breeding, socially complex, you know, what a cool thing to study. But just within my lifespan, we've gone from academic interest to conservation panic. And, you know, it's scary how fast it's happened. And Les Underhill has rated the southern ground hornbill as the swiftest declining bird species in South Africa. A lot of the early work was trying to figure out, you know, once there was a sort of feeling that, whoa, maybe things aren't so great for the species. There was a pilot project with the Makulek in northern Kruger to see if it was possible to rear ground hornbills as a community-based income generation project. And this is one of my dad's MSc students, Rogers, and, you know, it showed that you could rear them, but that it was such an expensive long-term thing that it didn't have the sort of financial outcomes that they'd hoped for. But there were then these birds that could potentially be used for reintroductions. And so that is me as a gormless teenager in the blue t-shirt with my mum and brother on the first failed reintroduction that was attempted in Swaziland. These birds were tame ducks. This is us being their shepherds and guides. you know, and it's just, we've come so far from this, and it's amazing what can be achieved with perseverance over decades, but also by the inputs of a huge number of people. Initially, all of the research thinking really was about the sort of savannas, the perfect savannas, the Krugers of the world. You know, this is ground hornbills, this is where they live, this is what they need, and this is where most of the preliminary research was conducted. But the more we looked into this, the more we looked around and found that ground hornbills really, this is probably more a natural habitat photo for ground hornbills across the range, right all the way up to Kenya. They do certainly occur in the protected areas, and they do well because there's no human threats. But this is the reality that we need to be doing our conservation work within, is that these birds will and do share their habitats and their territories with people. And as Evie said, across multiple land uses, multiple cultural beliefs, multiple levels of personal protection, depending on who they share the land with. And so this is the context that the project has gone forward with, is really looking at what can we do for ground hornbills beyond the borders of protected areas. As a project, we sort of work to 6 pillars, and the first is monitoring. Until we know what we have, it's really hard to know what to do on the ground. And I'm not going to go into too much detail because Jared's taken you through the basics of that. But really, you know, we're able to say with confidence that Kruger is at capacity. So where can those young dispersals go? And so that leads into Patience's project to try and understand where within that buffer zone around our biggest protected area is safe for young dispersals to be encouraged out by provision of artificial nests, maybe tweaking of a land use, maybe just education and awareness. What is needed to make that buffer area safer for young dispersals to move out of the park and set up a stronger buffer population around, beyond the borders of the formal protected area. And the monitoring, as Jared said, is, we are just blown away by the number of citizen scientists who aren't birders, who are truck drivers, bus drivers, principals at schools, who've really are leaning in to capture every single ground hornbill sighting that they have. And the little map on the left, the green is the sort of coverage that Jared was able to achieve in the first year of the monitoring, but the yellow is what he's managed to sort of pick up in the second year. And I think also now that COVID restrictions are opening up, we're getting a lot more data. And so we just need to keep going and make sure that ultimately we get 100% coverage, and just keep adding groups, adding supporters, adding citizen scientists to this project. So the second sort of pillar that we lean on or lean into or work off is restoration. So we know that within our national population, there are those that are safe within protected areas. There are fragmented areas that need support, but there are also areas where the southern ground hornbill has become locally extinct. These birds have been wiped out of these areas for 60, 70, 80 years. And as a consequence, we're seeing a weakening of the national population because of these growing gaps on the landscape. And Natasha has taken you through in detail, the sort of process from harvesting these chicks right through to trying to make these beautiful, fully formed groups that are able to breed successfully in these areas where the birds have become locally extinct. It's as Carl and Carrie know, it's the hot season coming, and we're going to be under those big black hoods candling the eggs. But with advanced technology and again, this growing network across the world, ability, access to information, sharing of knowledge, we're able to candle the eggs and return on harvest day within 1 to 2 days. Precision, which means when those chicks go through to Natasha and Delisha at the Baobab, they're as healthy and fit as possible. There's no, there hasn't been time in the nest for them to lose condition, lose fitness, become dehydrated. And so, I feel each year we're adding new skill sets to the greater team, new technologies that help us ultimately have better conservation outcomes. We harvest either a pipped egg or these tiny tinies, and this is then this redundant stock that would naturally die in the nest is essentially a free source of birds with which to learn how to do reintroductions. And now that we've got a handle on that, how to now expand these reintroductions across the country. It's been an incredibly slow learning process. These birds are extremely difficult, not only just in the hand rearing, you know, we've got a handle on that, but then we reached a point where we had super healthy artificially reared birds, but they didn't have the right behaviors. And so we've put a lot of work into the last 10 years, I guess, trying to fine tune how on earth we can support these youngsters through that really important learning phase when they have to learn from all of the experienced mentors in a group. So they themselves have the best possible chance of being successful breeders themselves. We hosted a reintroduction workshop, lost track of the years since COVID. It was pre-COVID, no, during COVID, so 2020. And two preliminary core populations have been identified as needing support from reintroductions. Because it's such a slow, difficult, expensive process, we're using the reintroduced birds really strategically to sort of plug gaps in the landscape. So there's what we call the Mabula-Marakele complex, and we should have 6 groups out by early March. And then the next most important one is the Northern Zululand complex. If you look at the map on the bottom left, those green blocks are where there were historical records, but where there's been nothing since the early 2000s, nothing recorded at all. And yet we know there's one single group of 3 in Eswatini, and that just isn't, you know, the youngsters from Northern Zululand are not going to reach Southern Kruger and vice versa. And we also need to get a handle then on what is happening on the Mozambican side of that border, so we can ensure that we can regrow and strengthen natural gene flow between Kruger and the rest of the country's population. Yeah, Evie, I was very happy to see from your modeling that these are important areas, and that, you know, it makes me happy that, you know, these are the cores that we're going ahead with to keep strengthening and growing across these regions, even in a changing climate. The other part of restoration is providing nests. These ground-hornbills are already in sort of the most perfect situation, Kruger kind of habitat, naturally nest limited. And so we need to try and find ways of supporting them. There's, you know, multiple reasons why we're running out of big nest trees in the landscape. And really the last thing we can afford is any individual group to take a pause in breeding. They can't afford it. They need to keep going. And so we need to do everything we can to support each and every group to make sure they have a good, strong, functional nest, but also one that is going to support them in going forward into a heating climate. So we will be continuing to work on each year, refining the nests, working together with Kyle and Carrie and the Hotbird Project to make sure that the nests that we are producing are best fitted for basically super nests that a ground hornbill can want for nothing, even in a growingly warm summer breeding season. The nests are fun but messy, and if anyone wants to come through and build nests with us, you're more than welcome. It's incredibly satisfying when Kyle and Carrie send through the videos and photos of the youngsters in the nests, especially this fledging a chick from a nest that you built. It's just, you know, they're working, they seem okay, Carrie's going to make sure they're okay. And going forward, we're just going to keep refining and refining and refining until we have the best possible nest solution. This coming breeding season, throughout the Lowveld, we're going to be doing 3D scans within the wild nests to try and get an understanding of what that inner space is like. Because in the past, we've assessed things like height and, you know, size of the opening and thickness of the walls, but we're looking, you know, how is the hot air leaving a nest? What kind of shape is better suited? And so by the end of the breeding season, we should have a sample of about 60 nests scanned, 3D scanned, and we can start then looking at what makes the best, most productive nests in terms of the space that we're providing rather than the structure. And then going forward, we would like to get away from using these artificial materials, even though they're totally coated within a safe resin. We just would like to move towards more natural substances. And part of Carl Brand's PhD between Belgium and South Africa, one of the things we're going to be looking at is possibly building fungus nests using mycelium and growing the internal woody structure of the nest and working with different densities and things like that, so we can get away from using man-made materials. Everything we do has this running thread of awareness. We find, especially on commercial farms, we get a lot of, oh, I didn't know, from farmers who have used poison or using lead ammunition, haven't managed to do anything about protecting transformer boxes. And we really need to up our game in the next few years, getting awareness out, A, that the species is really in trouble, and B, that each and every South African has a massive role to play in the future of these species. Because they're resident on a territory, they need the people that they share the land with to be the people who are going to protect them and support them going forward. So we've been doing a lot of community work. We've done pilot projects with a number of traditional authority councils in terms of custodianship and trying to understand what may be needed and how we can best support these communities to look after their own ground-hornbill families. And I mean, given the longevity of ground-hornbills, any of the elders in this image, the alpha male in their resident ground-hornbill territory may well have been a chick when they were young boys. And it's just that sharing the longevity, sharing the similar life history strategies with people, we're finding is going a huge way to endearing them to their own ground-hornbills and making them look at those birds that they see every day with different eyes. Timber, our costume, continues to run right through the landscape. Although we do a lot of work with rural schools, it's an endangered species sliding to critically endangered. And so we have shifted our focus a bit in the last year to really targeting the adults, the decision makers, the change makers, we call them within a community, the people who are the ones who are going to be able to make behavior changes that will make a landscape safer for ground-hornbills. So it's a shame because this is a part of our job that we all love very much. But we do need to nurture the next generation, but we really need to be focusing on those who will have the most and fastest immediate impact on the persistence of individual groups across the country. My biggest job over the next year or so is making sure that the custodianship program gathers momentum now. We did successful pilot projects both on commercial land and communally managed land. And we will have slightly different variations of the same thing, but in both cases, the results were overwhelmingly positive. And the whole custodianship program is based off the fact that ground-hornbills are central place foragers during the breeding season. So if that wooden stick or whatever is the nest, sorry, I'm running out of air. If this is the nest, the birds are going to be spending 2 to 3 kilometers moving around that nest. So if we can target each and every landowner for each and every known nest, we've gone a long way to securing both the site of productivity for that group, but also the foraging areas around them. So really targeted mitigation. And with time and resources and hopefully the support of each of these individual landowners, that will grow until each and every territory has a much greater level of community support, community protection, or at the very least understanding and knowledge. But obviously, awareness is nice, but awareness without behavior change is not going to be enough. So that is what we're pushing for, and that's one of my biggest things to get done in the next little while. We will then continue to to mitigate for as many of the known threats as we can. Just, ease some of the human-wildlife conflict, and also remove some of the risks to the birds themselves. So continue to provide contravision to cut the reflections, continue to look for other ways of trying to keep birds away from windows and making unhappy neighbors and possibly injuring themselves. And so, if you think of the long list of threats, we really are trying to tackle each and every one of those as best as possible, and trying to, I guess they're just problems that need to be solved, and they're all people problems. And so I'm sure with a collective of smart minds, we'll be able to tackle each of these effectively. Increasingly, as Katja mentioned this morning, the lead poisoning is the more we look for it, the more we're finding it. And the loss of this last bird at such crazy high lead levels on a protected area is really heart-wrenching. That was an area we assumed safe. And it almost feels like these birds are magnetic to lead, which obviously they're not. But, I'm beginning to wonder if they aren't the canary in the coal mine for lead. They seem to be telling us that lead is a much bigger threat in the environment to wildlife than we previously thought, now that we're starting to look for it. And also we're seeing the astounding impact it's having on populations. We've lost multiple alpha birds to lead poisoning, and it just, we've got to try and get a handle on this as fast as possible. We work with the National Lead Task Team. I'm a member of the Lead Task Team, and we've been putting a lot of effort into education and awareness. Although a ban on lead would be great, we feel very strongly at the current time that would just really put people's backs up really against that. Most people don't know that lead is a problem. And so until people have a greater awareness, a greater understanding, and are starting to look for natural alternatives themselves, implementing a ban is not going to get us the wins. We definitely in the country do not have the enforcement necessary. And so we're working on a number of communication campaigns to start getting the word out. And it would be great if we could call on you all to help share this material as it comes out, so we can reach the widest possible community. And we're targeting all sort of lead stakeholders, be it people who shoot for whatever reason, be it hunting, be it culling, management on reserves, anti-poaching, security, police, fishing, fisher folk. It's not any one of these, but all of these that are a problem. And I feel with ground-hornbills, we're only just touching the tip of the iceberg. And I suspect that things like our mesopredators, both mammal and bird, and scavengers, are probably much harder hit by lead than we could possibly imagine. And so we just need to keep a handle on this and keep trying to figure out what it is we can do. An exciting new collaboration, and this is one of the requirements from the biodiversity management plan, is looking at forming partnerships with traditional health practitioners. Although at present we think the offtake is quite low and probably opportunistic, we don't know that for sure. There've been sporadic snapshot studies at what is in markets, and they certainly are found in markets, but we need to get an understanding of how widespread this is across the country to understand how much is coming from within South Africa, how much is coming into the country or going out of the country across borders, and then also have a look at what impact that is having on the population. This is a bird in Faraday, and we really need to get a handle on what birds are being pulled from the groups. As I mentioned before with the genetics, is it whole groups that are being targeted in one poisoning incident or trapping incident? Are hunters going back to groups year after year and taking off the individuals because they're naive and much easier to catch or hunt? Where are these birds coming from? Where are the hotspots of capture? And if that coupled with our ongoing monitoring of each and every pentad, we should be able to try and figure out where to target resources. But, you know, this can only be done in partnership with the traditional health practitioners. And so we've initiated conversations, and now that, you know, just with the leaders of the traditional health organization, they are shocked to find how badly ground hornbills are doing. And have expressed a lot of interest in partnering with us to find solutions. So I find that really exciting. And there's a PhD student, Nolwazi, who's starting, or she's started her fieldwork this week, and she's going to be sampling 8 animals and 8 plants in all muti markets across South Africa, so every province, and a number of species. But just the information that's come out from that, from one market on one field day, is astounding. So I'm really excited to see where this project goes. This is in collaboration with IC Wild at UCT and Wits, and Louise at Sandparks, and, you know, and then obviously with Patience and her work. And I think we're going to have a much clearer understanding soon of where the birds are coming from, what's important. Are there any alternatives that can be looked at? And then working to figure out how to try and minimize the offtake in conjunction and collaboration with the traditional health practitioners themselves. And then going forwards, next year, we're going to be holding a conservation planning workshop for the Botswana ground hornbill population. So that's going to be in February, trying to get a handle on what is the conservation status, and what can they start doing within Botswana to support and protect their populations. And then after that, we're heading to Namibia. So here again, we've been asked by the government to do a conservation planning workshop, but here they've asked us also to ground truth the current distribution. And what's really exciting about this one is the conservation planning specialist group has always included communities as part of conservation planning, but often they end up being an afterthought when the plan is drawn up. And so we're going to be trying a few new things that sort of goes beyond the normal scope of a CPSG planning workshop, to make sure that each and every one of the communities that shares the land with ground hornbills across the north of Namibia are integral stakeholders from the very get-go of the conservation planning. So I hope that we get a very strong and well-accepted plan for Namibia, but also that will inform future CPSG planning protocols on how to make sure that communities are really seen as vital stakeholders rather than an afterthought. So we should be wrapping that up in April. And it's wonderful to be able to start sharing what we've learned here, but also understanding what's different across the border. When we did the Zimbabwe one, we were astounded to find how different the threats are. You kind of, well, I did certainly assume that a lot of the threats would be the same, but when we went through the threat mapping, we found that it's a very different context, and as a consequence, those birds have other things to worry about than they do in South Africa. So I'm really looking forward to learning more through this process. And the biodiversity plan is almost done. Believe it or not, it's taken 3 years. But I think everyone's, already got started on what needs to be done. And between us all today, and the projects that I know are ongoing, the ones in green, that this was on the list of BMP research priorities for the next 5 years, just about all of them have been started, are projects that are underway. And it's really exciting to see that within a year, so much has happened. It has, catalyzed so much research, and just listening to all the presentations today, I really feel together we'll be able to go through this list, tick everything, and by the end of this 5 years, be able to come together again as a collaborative group, and look at the next 5 years and what we need to be doing to support these birds. Certainly from our side, but I think I can speak for the entire task team, we are committed for the next 20 years. We've just been very fortunate to get 2 big grants, one from the Whitley Fund for Nature, and an IUCN SOS grant. And, you know, this kind of backing really helps us know that we can commit, you know, in terms of capacity, in terms of funding, in terms of getting out there and making sure that we tick all of these things that we know are important that we need to do for the species. So I'd like to thank you all for listening. I'd like to thank you all for participating. It's been an incredible day to listen to all of this and learn so much. And I can already see so many new collaborations forming, and, you know, where we need to link arms and come together to get a whole bunch of this stuff done. And this just came in now when I mentioned this morning that the bushfire was creeping closer to our camp. We've been worried about the house burning down, but our resident group has been out looking for little bride bits of anything that they can find. So I'd like to thank you all. And I must share our sponsors. They are too many to fit on a slide, which is great. But they definitely need recognition. If I can find it. I will put them up on the slide so long, but if there's any questions so long, please let me know. Okay, I'm scrolling for questions. William, why would you continue to manage the captive breeding of Tanzania and South Africa differently if you weren't able to confirm the previous suspected genetic difference? So William, in answer to that, the suspected difference was minor, and so it is just conservation good practice to not. As I said, if we were down to the last 1,000, it wouldn't matter. But there may be small things like pathogen resistance or things like that. And we don't want to take that risk, and we don't need to. You know, it's better for us to manage them separately. It would be doing the right things. And we have asked around to a number of conservation genetic specialists, and they agree that we should just keep going with them separate. Just keep trying to do the best thing, I guess. Antoinette has her hand up. Antoinette, hi.
Yes, Lucy, maybe just to add to your answer to the question, what we found with the genetics is that it is following a stepping stone model. In other words, a population in South Africa is less differentiated from one in Kenya. You know, if you think of a stepping stone pattern, that is what the genetics is showing us. So South Africa, Botswana will be closer. South Africa and Zambia will be less closer, if I can explain it like that. Yeah, so that the initial finding was that, and the genetics is still confirming it. Thank you.
Thanks, Antoinette. And then, William, you have a comment about the leopard at the nest footage. Is it worth looking, I guess this is for Kyle, or maybe me, is it worth looking at measures to reduce natural predation, but already managing artificial nest box design and supplementation? Can solar powered or other deterrents not be used on trunks of trees, as it's becoming evident that every single chick is important? It's definitely something to think about, William. It's not something we've taken into account, but I think it's definitely something we're looking at. Are there any other questions? Cool. I think we've bored everyone to death with ground-hornbill talk today. Thank you, everyone. Thank you to the speakers. Yeah, I think we've got an exciting couple of years ahead of us. And to all of you who are members of the action group, I'll see you tomorrow morning at 9. Thanks, everyone. Cheers.